Well, if I thought summertime was going to be a period where I could recharge the batteries, as it were, it couldn't have been further from the truth. It was a very busy time, some amazing birds, including mega rarities. We had some really fun adventures. There were record-breaking temperatures and a new breeding bird for Norfolk, so quite a bit to get through. So let's just get started. Here we have turtle dove. This is an African migrant. Always lovely to both see and hear this bird. This was taken down at Stodmarsh in Kent. Here we have long-eared owl. This is one of 3 birds that was roosting at Elmley Nature Reserve on the Isle of Sheppey in Kent, and was tucked into some trees over a pond, which was quite nice, which afforded it some protection, make sure that people didn't get too close to it, which was nice. Seeing a long-eared owl is always a wonderful experience. I can recount every long-eared owl that I've seen because they do come few and far between. You know, I first saw them when I was a kid at Bird World, and then my first wild long-eared owl was in the late 80s. It was over a canal near to where I lived. My really good friend Jock worked on the canal boats and had spotted this bird and let me know, and I went down to see it. So that was my first wild long-eared owl. And then since then I've had some extremely privileged experiences actually ringing these birds out on Salisbury Plain when I was a volunteer there with the Bulford Conservation Group. Also, I did a couple of trips out to Russia. First of all, out to Biological Station Rabachi, and then spent a week at a place called Fringilla. This is on the Kurish Spit, and the morning that we arrived at Fringilla, they had caught 99 long-eared owls the night before. There was a huge movement. I think Tengmaum's owl was caught as well, and short-eared. But we got to ring some of these long-eared owls, and it was just an amazing experience. Summertime is always a great time for passage waders. Just going to highlight a few here. First up, this is wood sandpiper. It's a very rare breeder here in the UK, but up in Scotland. But I think most of the birds that we see moving through on passage are from the European population. Always a great bird to see, lots of personality, and of course it's great to see these birds compared to some of the other sort of more common and regular sandpipers, things like common sandpiper and green sandpiper. Here we have Curlew Sandpiper. This bird breeds up in the Arctic, Siberia, and then winters mainly in Africa. It's not common but regular, moving through here in the UK, and always wonderful to see. And here we have this handsome Ruff, probably mid-molt and lost his ruff now. This is again another rare breeder here in the UK, but they mainly breed up on the tiger bogs in the north, and winter down in mainly in Africa. Always a lovely bird to see, and they come in all different sizes and plumages, so always fun to test your ID knowledge on these birds. And here we have little Stint. This little Stint sat in front of these wonderful Mediterranean gulls. Little Stint breed in the sort of northeast Scandinavia and further northeast, and then tend to winter down in, sometimes down in the Med and in North Africa. Always lovely to see them. Again, they're not common but regular, and you know, when seen at a distance, they show quite pale. But they're you know, in terms of their size, they're a sort of, I don't know, 2/3 of the size of a dunlin, so quite a small bird. So the first bird, sort of rarer bird, but actually is fairly regular now, is Glossy Ibis. These birds, you know, there's more and more of these birds sort of hanging out over the winter, and I'm sure it won't be that long until they go the same way as like little egret did back in the 90s by establishing themselves here and recolonising. And then of course since then we've got breeding birds like great egret and spoonbill, and of course cattle egret. So I believe that there was an attempt to breed in Lincolnshire with this bird, but yeah, just sometimes you see this bird and it looks almost like it's completely black, you know, on depending on the light, but here it really does, these wonderful sort of greens and plum colours really stand out, particularly against the backdrop there of these lovely common pochard. This is ring-necked duck. It is a North American rarity, but again fairly annual here in the UK. This is again another bird that sort of was a bird that in the, you know, I would see regularly in the UK. When I lived out in Canada, and I actually twitched a tufted duck that was with a bunch of ring-necked ducks down in Victoria on Vancouver Island, and then here I am looking for ring-necked ducks with all of the tufted ducks out at Dungeness. Next up is our star. This is European bee-eater, a extremely exotic bird, and a bird that you would tend to see down in Spain and France and into Greece and into the Med, even into parts of Africa. They have bred in the UK in the past, but very sporadic, and the birds that have actually just turned up aren't always the easiest birds to twitch because they don't tend to stay in the same area for very long. I was fortunate enough to get my only bee-eater at Pegwell Bay in Kent. I think it was about 7 or 8 years ago. But these birds turned up in Norfolk. They were showing an interest in a particular area, and the people involved, I believe, kept this slightly suppressed because they just wanted to see what they were going to do. And once they had confirmation that the birds were really looking at this particular quarry as a breeding site, the landowner, some very good volunteers and the RSPB all collaborated and created a viewpoint so that people would be able to come and see the bee-eaters, but it would afford them protection, keeping them at distance and letting them get on with their breeding. The outcome was wonderful. They were successful and hatched and fledged young, and we will now have to wait and see if they return and continue this colony. But it was absolutely fantastic for everyone involved, and like I say, a new breeding record for Norfolk. Here we have another exotic. This is Hoopoe, a very distinctive bird, quite unmistakable actually, and its vocalization and its flight pattern and its plumage, so not too hard to ID this one. Hoopoe is a bird that even when I've been in Spain or Greece or France, seeing a hoopoe, I always find it exciting, They're just so full of character, and so it's lovely to see them here in the UK. I believe this is my third now. So this particular bird was at Hinksworth in Hertfordshire, and it was frequenting some fields and paddocks close to this lovely church. And lots of people turned up for this bird, and it really did put on a bit of a show for us all, though it did give us the run around from time to time, believe you me. So next up is an absolute mega. This is red-tailed shrike, or Turkestan Shrike. Breeds in sort of Siberia and Central Asia, including Kazakhstan, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and tends to winter in East Africa and sort of northwest India. What it's doing on a farm in North Yorkshire is anyone's guess, but it sure made a lot of people happy. I twitched this bird on my own, and I got to Bempton Cliffs about 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning after a 5-hour drive, and walked out to the farm, and as you can see, got some fantastic views of this bird. Just, you know, a really exciting bird to see, and it actually hung around for quite a while, so lots of people got to see it. After I got my fill of the Turkestan Shrike, I made my way to Bempton Cliffs, to one of the viewing areas there, in hope of seeing the very rare black-browed albatross. Unfortunately, I didn't get that for my 2022 year, but I have put some video in here now for you to see. This is a bird that I got in 2021. Absolutely phenomenal bird. Should be down in the South Atlantic, and I believe it is the only black-browed albatross that is being recorded in the North Atlantic at the moment. So it did turn up in 2013 at in the Baltic Seas off of Germany and Denmark, and made its way over to Bempton Cliffs, North Yorkshire in 2017, much to the delight of many birders who got that. I was not one of them. And then it disappeared for 3 years and returned in 2020, and has been showing up each summer since. And then the following morning I headed over to the River Idle washlands in Nottinghamshire for a Caspian term, which I got at distance. And then from there, straight over to Potterick Carr Reserve in South Yorkshire to see these wonderful birds. This is black-winged stilt. These birds had bred and had 4 young at the time I was there. Okay, next up is a trip that I'm going to have to dilute somewhat to include it in the presentation. But in mid-July, my good birding pal Chris Charlesworth was over from British Columbia, Canada, to attend the Rutland Bird Fair. And we had arranged that after his commitments at the fair, we would take on a week's birding in search of some specific targets for him. I have known Chris for over 20 years now, birded with him in the Okanagan Valley in British Columbia, Canada, and also up into the Peace River. And we also had a couple of excursions, one down to Washington, which was lots of fun, and another wonderful trip out to Texas, where we got eastern warblers and desert birds, and a trip that I will cover in another presentation. So our main route after the bird fair was north to Bempton Cliffs, and then back through Lincolnshire and over into Norfolk for a couple of days. And then we headed back to Surrey to regroup and sort out admin before the next leg of our journey, which was a loop tour in Wales, and then through, back and down into Kent before Chris had to make his way back to BC. We got over 139 species, and I believe that Chris got actually 15 lifers, and our target was 10, so he went home very happy. We did manage to get the red-tailed shrike at Bempton and the seabirds that Chris was after, so that was quite successful. En route down and back through Lincolnshire, we stopped at Alkborough Flats to twitch a Stilt Sandpiper. This sort of North American rarity was showing there, and fortunately we got there just in time. We got about a 5-minute look at this bird before it disappeared out of view. What I've done here is I've put a couple of photos of Stilt Sandpiper up that I'd taken out on Vancouver Island about 12-13 years ago. Next we stopped at Frampton Marsh, and because it was so hot, there was literally no one at the reserve, just Chris and I, and we poked around there, got some quite good birds, things like little ring plover and spoonbill and this beautiful black-tailed godwit. And from there we headed over into Norfolk. Our first day in Norfolk, we spent some time at the Raptor viewpoint at Swanton Novas and connected with honey buzzard and northern goshawk. And it was here that we met Dominic Mitchell, founder of Birdwatch magazine. And I've met Dominic once before, really lovely guy, and got chatting with him, and he gave us a tip for a good place for Medgull that was close by. So we followed Dominic down to this, one of his local patches, and were fortunate enough to get the Medgull, and then we made our way to Cley next to the sea and the Cley Reserve, which is extremely famous here on the Norfolk coast. And our plan was to walk the east bank, but it turned out that this day was the hottest day ever recorded in the UK's history, and we were really feeling it by then, by midday. So instead of walking the east bank like two hardy birders should have done, we made our way to the Three Swallows pub, and took shelter in the shadows, and nursed a couple of pints, rehydrated, and dodged some of the worst of the heat. But to be honest, it never went away all day. So we ended up making our way over to Snettisham Coastal Path, where we ended up getting turtle dove and more medgulls before spending another night in King's Lynn. The following morning we headed over to Trimmingham, and it was funny that the weather changed quite a lot, and it was quite windy and almost like a spit in the air, and we had to wait a while, but we eventually connected with the bee-eaters, so that was great. Our trip to Wales was very successful. White-throated dipper was one of Chris's most wanted birds, and we got that bird on the morning that we headed out there. We stopped at a site that I got a tip on. From there we went to the Gower Peninsula and connected with red-billed chough. And as we did in the spring, we then headed over to Gwenferrid Dinas. We did get all of our targets over there, though they were very far and few between. Completely different to the spring experience. But as you can see in this photo here, we did get the wind chat as well. Back down and then finally into Kent, where we poked around Ore Marshes and Stod Marsh. Here we got distant, but this lovely Curlew Sandpiper at the back there, and also a North American rarity, Bonaparte's Gull, a gull that Chris would be very familiar with over in Canada. Right, next comes up a bunch of herons. So we got purple heron down at Stodmarsh. After about 4 attempts, this bird Jacqueline spotted flying over the Grove Ferry side and got the scope onto it, and yep, sure enough, it was purple heron. So it was good to get that bird finally. And then at Ore Marshes, at roost time, we went in and got black-crowned night heron. A juvenile was flying into the reed beds there about 9:15. So that was a good bird to get. And then this wonderful Squacco Heron, which was down at Pagham Harbour in West Sussex. A well-earned rest and some sea watching down at Cornwall for a few days produced some incredible birds. We did have a pelagic trip booked out of Penzance, but again we had another cancelled boat trip, which was a little disappointing. We did, however, make up for it by taking a lifeboat out of St Ives to the Godrevy Lighthouse to see the seals. And this particular boat has been in existence since 1899. I believe it's one of the oldest lifeboats that is still operating, and it saved over 200 lives from 1900 to 1933. Here on the trip we got great looks at Manx shearwater and European storm petrel, and at the harbour we had wonderful up close and personal looks at ruddy turnstone. There was 2 sea watches that I took part in. One was at Pendine, which produced lots of Manx shearwater and my first and lifer Balearic shearwater. I had 3 move through there when I was doing my watch. And then I went down to Porthguara, and there was lots of people down there doing the sea watch on that morning. I could only go down for a couple of hours, but it was well worth it. Got not only more Manx shearwater moving through and European storm petrel, but also great skua, which was a brilliant bird to get for the big year list. My lifer great shearwater, I got 3 of them on that actual watch, and unbelievably I got Wilson's storm petrel. Was actually spotted by someone else, but most people were able to get on it. En route home, we stopped in at Hamwall RSPB Reserve, where we were able to connect with a spotted crake. The next big bird that was very exciting to see was greater sand plover, and this was at Redcar Beach in North Yorkshire. We stopped overnight and then got down to the beach early. Where the bird had been, it was no longer showing, which is always it's the last thing you want to hear when you turn up a twitch. But I could see a group of birders about a mile away down the beach, and they all looked like they were looking at something through my scope. So I started walking down there. Jacqueline kindly went and moved the car, and then we both met up, and we got down to where this bird was showing and got some lovely looks at it. So this is a bird sort of normally associated with the Middle East, and wonderful to see it mixed in with all these ring plovers. Next came a redback shrike at Medmerry Nature Reserve in West Sussex. Actually, I couldn't believe my luck when I turned up at this twitch, because got down there. There was, I think there was a couple of people there, and they hadn't seen it for about an hour. And we just walked up the road, and I looked round the corner, and I could see it sitting in the back of these brambles, and it flew across the road, landed right in front of us, and proceeded to sort of poke around and eat some insects. Really, really close. So had some wonderful looks at this bird. Our final bird for the summer period was Pectoral Sandpiper. Pectoral Sandpiper is probably one of the most common rare North American species that turns up here. It's fairly annual and regular, but always wonderful to see. Great bird. And this was at Key Haven and Pennington Marsh in Hampshire. That bird represented the 222nd bird for the year, so surpassed my 200 goal, and I can't remember when I decided, but I decided that the new target was going to be 240. That's what I thought was an achievable sort of goal at that time, so yeah, my goal was to see 240 species. Roll on the autumn.